The rain hammered against the windows of Westbrook Manor as Clara Hartley stood before the mirror in the Duchess's chambers, her fingers trembling as she fastened the pearl necklace around her throat. 3 months had passed since she had accepted the most peculiar employment of her life, to become a living ghost, to step into the shoes of a woman long dead, to play the role of the Duchess of Westbrook in public, while her husband pretended their marriage had never been broken by death. 3 months since Lord Edmund Ashford, Duke of Westbrook, had found her in the shabby boarding house in Cheapside, where she had been surviving on the meagre wages of a seamstress, her resemblance to his late wife so striking that he had gasped when their eyes met. "You could be her twin," he had whispered, his voice raw with a grief that had not faded despite 2 years of mourning. Clara had stepped back, unnerved by the intensity of his gaze. "I assure you, Your Grace, I am no one's twin. I am simply Clara Hartley, and I must ask you to leave my establishment." But the Duke had not left. Instead, he had made an offer that would change everything. £500 for 3 months of service. All she had to do was attend social functions at his side, wear the late Duchess's gowns, respond to her name, and help him maintain the fiction that his wife was still alive long enough to secure a crucial business arrangement that required a married man at its helm. "It is a deception, I grant you," he had acknowledged, his aristocratic features drawn with exhaustion, "but a necessary one. My competitors seek to destroy my family's holdings. They believe a widower too grief-stricken to manage his affairs is vulnerable. If they think the Duchess lives, I gain the time I need to fortify my position." £500. It was more money than Clara had seen in her lifetime, enough to secure her future, to escape the grinding poverty that had claimed her parents and threatened to claim her as well. She had accepted. God help her, she had accepted, and now she stood in a dead woman's chambers, wearing a dead woman's jewels, preparing to step into a dead woman's life. "The carriage is ready, Your Grace," announced Mrs. Pemberton, the housekeeper, who had served the Westbrook family for 30 years and who had wept openly when Clara first arrived. So perfectly did she mirror the late Duchess. Clara turned from the mirror, her reflection showing a woman transformed. Gone was the threadbare dress of a seamstress. In its place, a gown of midnight blue silk, cut in the latest fashion, diamonds glittering at her throat and ears. She looked every inch a duchess, and the knowledge both thrilled and terrified her. "Thank you, Mrs. Pemberton," she replied, keeping her voice steady despite the rapid beating of her heart. The Duke awaited her in the entrance hall, his tall frame clad in evening dress that emphasized the breadth of his shoulders. He was a handsome man, Clara had to admit, though the grief carved into the lines of his face aged him beyond his 30 years. His dark hair was threaded with premature silver, his grey eyes haunted by memories she could not share. He looked up as she descended the staircase, and for one terrible moment, Clara saw naked pain flash across his features before he schooled his expression into careful neutrality. "You look well, Duchess," he said, offering his arm with the formal courtesy that marked all their interactions. "The tongue will have no reason to doubt." Clara placed her gloved hand upon his sleeve, feeling the tension coiled beneath the fine fabric. "I shall do my best to maintain the illusion, Your Grace." As their carriage rolled through the rain-slicked streets of London toward the Hartington ball, Clara found herself studying the Duke's profile in the dim light. What kind of love drove a man to such desperate measures? What devotion compelled him to hire a stranger to wear his wife's face rather than accept the finality of death? "You must be wondering," the Duke said quietly, his gaze fixed on the passing streets. "What manner of man would engage in such a charade?" Clara hesitated, then spoke the truth. "I confess, Your Grace, the question has occurred to me." A bitter smile touched his lips. "The manner of man who failed his wife when she needed him most." the manner of man who seeks to preserve her memory by any means necessary, however unconventional. You loved her very much, Clara observed. It was not a question. I loved her beyond reason, beyond sense, beyond the boundaries of what is proper or sane. His hands tightened on the silver-topped cane he carried, and when she was taken from me, I found I could not let her go, not entirely, not when so much depends upon her continued existence, if only in appearance. The Hartington ball blazed with light and music when they arrived. The cream of society gathered in glittering assembly. As the Duke and his supposed Duchess were announced, a ripple of interest swept through the crowd. The Duke of Westbrook had been in mourning for 2 years, declining all social invitations. His sudden return to society with his wife, whom many had believed dead, set tongues wagging with speculation. "Your Grace," Lady Hartington swept forward, her sharp eyes assessing Clara from head to toe. "What a delight to see you return to us. We had heard you were quite unwell." Clara summoned the training the Duke had provided. The careful lessons in the late Duchess's mannerisms, her way of speaking, her social connections. "I am much recovered, Lady Hartington." The country air worked wonders. The older woman's expression remained skeptical, but she inclined her head. "Indeed. And how fortuitous that your recovery coincides with the Duke's negotiations with the Rothmore Company. One might almost think the timing strategic." The barb was unmistakable, but Clara met it with the serene smile she had practiced in the mirror. "One might think many things, Lady Hartington. The truth is often far simpler than speculation suggests." As Lady Hartington moved away, the Duke's hand covered Clara's where it rested on his arm. "Well done," he murmured. "She has always been suspicious by nature." The evening passed in a blur of introductions and careful conversations. Clara danced with the Duke, their movements synchronized after weeks of practice, though she could not help but notice how he held himself apart from her, as though fearing to touch her too closely. When the waltz ended, he led her to the refreshment room, securing champagne that she barely touched. "You are doing admirably," he said, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "No one suspects." "Not yet," Clara replied, setting down her glass. "But how long can we maintain this deception, Your Grace? Someone will eventually see through the illusion." The Duke's jaw tightened. "We need only maintain it until the Rothmore contract is secured. 3 more weeks, perhaps 4. Then the fiction may end. 3 more weeks of living another woman's life. 3 more weeks of wearing her clothes, speaking her words, standing at the side of a man who looked at her and saw only the ghost of the woman he had lost." Clara found herself wondering, not for the first time, if £500 was worth the price of becoming a shadow. As they returned to Westbrook Manor in the early hours of the morning, the rain had stopped, leaving the streets glistening under the gaslight. The Duke was silent during the journey, his expression distant and brooding. "Your Grace," Clara ventured, as the carriage rolled through the gates of the estate, "may I ask a question?" He turned to her, his grey eyes unreadable in the darkness. "You may ask, though I cannot promise an answer." "What was she like? Your wife, I mean, the woman I am meant to portray." A long silence followed, broken only by the rhythmic clatter of the horses' hooves. When the Duke spoke at last, his voice was rough with emotion. "She was everything good in this world, kind beyond measure, generous of spirit, quick to laugh. She saw beauty where others saw only ordinariness. She believed in the best of people, even when they disappointed her." He paused, his gaze drifting to the window. "She deserved better than the life I gave her, better than the end she met." "How did she die?" Clara asked softly. The Duke's expression hardened into a mask of controlled grief. "Childbed fever. She labored for 2 days, bringing our son into the world, and on the 3rd day she slipped away. The babe followed her within the week. The raw pain in his words struck Clara like a physical blow. She had known the Duchess was dead, had known the Duke was a widower, but she had not understood the depths of his loss until this moment. "I am sorry," she whispered. "Truly, as am I," he replied, "more sorry than any words can express." When they arrived at the manor, the Duke handed Clara down from the carriage with careful formality. "You played your part well tonight," he said. "I am grateful," Clara curtsied, the motion as natural now as breathing after weeks of practice. "I am glad to have pleased you, Your Grace." As she climbed the stairs to the Duchess's chambers, Clara could not shake the feeling that she had stepped into a story with no happy ending. A tale of grief so profound that it had driven a rational man to hire a stranger to bring his dead wife back to life, if only for a little while longer. The weeks that followed established a pattern. By day, Clara resided at Westbrook Manor, walking the gardens, reading in the library, occupying the Duchess's rooms as though she had always belonged there. By night, she accompanied the Duke to social functions, playing her role with increasing confidence. The Ton, always hungry for gossip, gradually accepted the fiction that the Duchess of Westbrook had recovered from a mysterious illness and returned to society. Only a few skeptics, like Lady Hartington, continued to question the truth of the matter. But something unexpected was happening, something Clara had not anticipated when she accepted the Duke's offer. She was beginning to forget where Clara Hartley ended and the Duchess of Westbrook began. The servants called her Your Grace, and she answered without hesitation. She knew the layout of Westbrook Manor as well as if she had lived there all her life. She could recite the names and connections of every family in the Duke's social circle, and most unsettling of all, she found herself responding to the Duke's presence with a warmth that had nothing to do with acting. He was not the cold, distant man she had first imagined. Beneath his grief, she discovered intelligence, dry wit, and a kindness he showed to his servants and tenants alike. He rode out each morning to inspect his estates, ensured that repairs were made promptly, and listened with genuine attention when his steward brought concerns. He was, Clara realized with growing alarm, exactly the sort of man she might have fallen in love with under different circumstances. One afternoon, as Clara sat in the Duchess's private sitting room, reviewing the social calendar with Mrs. Pemberton, the housekeeper paused in her recitation of upcoming engagements. "If I may be so bold, Your Grace," Mrs. Pemberton said carefully, "it does my heart good to see His Grace smile again. You have brought light back to this house." Clara's hands stilled on the papers before her. "I am glad if I have brought him some comfort, Mrs. Pemberton, but you must remember that I am not truly—" "Oh, I know what you are, miss," the housekeeper interrupted gently. "We all know. His Grace explained the arrangement to the senior staff before you arrived. But knowing and seeing are different things, aren't they? And what I see is a man waking from a long sleep, beginning to live again instead of merely existing." The words troubled Clara more than she cared to admit. Was the Duke truly healing, or was he simply clinging to a comforting illusion? And when the 3 months ended, when the Rothmore contract was secured, and Clara returned to her old life, what would become of him then? That evening, as Clara dressed for yet another social engagement, she studied her reflection with new eyes. She had gained weight since arriving at Westbrook Manor, the hollows of hunger no longer visible in her cheeks. Her skin glowed with health, her hair shone, her posture had transformed from the hunched defensiveness of poverty to the straight-backed confidence of nobility. She looked, she thought, with a mixture of pride and dismay, like she had been born to wear silk and diamonds, like she truly was a duchess. "You are ready, Your Grace?" the lady's maid inquired, offering Clara's evening cloak. "Yes," Clara replied, though the word felt like a lie. She was not ready. She would never be ready for what was coming, for the moment when the illusion shattered and she had to return to being ordinary Clara Hartley, seamstress and nobody. The Duke awaited her in the entrance hall as always, but tonight something was different. His eyes, when they met hers, held a warmth that made her breath catch. "You look beautiful," he said, and there was no practiced politeness in his tone, only simple sincerity. "Thank you, Your Grace," Clara managed, though her pulse had quickened alarmingly. In the carriage, the Duke was quieter than usual, his gaze drifting often to Clara's face. She found herself acutely aware of his nearness, of the space between them on the velvet seat, of the way his fingers drummed restlessly against his knee. "Is something troubling you, Your Grace?" she asked, at last, unable to bear the silence. He started slightly, as though pulled from deep thought. "Forgive me, I was considering the future, the Rothmore contract." Clara ventured, "In part." He hesitated, then continued. "The truth is, Miss Hartley, Clara, the contract was secured 3 days ago. The deception is no longer necessary." Clara's heart plummeted. 3 days. He had known for 3 days that their arrangement could end, yet he had said nothing. "I see," she said carefully. "Then I shall make arrangements to return to—" "Please," the Duke interrupted, his hand covering hers before he could stop himself. "Please do not leave, not yet." Clara stared at where his hand rested on hers, warm even through the fabric of their gloves. "Your Grace, I do not understand. If the contract is secured, if the deception has served its purpose—" "The deception may have served its purpose," he said roughly, "but I find I am not yet ready to let you go." The carriage rolled to a stop before the Montrose residence, where another glittering ball awaited, but neither of them moved. "What are you saying?" Clara whispered. The Duke's grey eyes held hers, and in their depths she saw conflict, desire, and something that looked dangerously like hope. "I am saying that somewhere in these weeks of pretense, I have forgotten it was pretense at all. I am saying that when I look at you, I no longer see my late wife. I see only you, Clara Hartley, and I find that I do not wish to return to a world where you are not part of my life." Clara's breath had grown shallow, her mind reeling. "You cannot mean you are speaking from loneliness, Your Grace, from the comfort of having someone fill the empty space she left behind." "No," he said, with quiet conviction. "I speak from recognition of what has been growing between us since the first day you entered my home. Tell me you do not feel it too. Tell me I am alone in this, and I will release you from our arrangement with the full payment promised and my apologies for overstepping. But if you feel even a fraction of what I feel—" "Stop," Clara pleaded, pulling her hand from his. "You hired me to play a role, Your Grace. You cannot now confuse the actress with the part she plays." "I am not confused," the Duke replied. "I know exactly what I feel and for whom I feel it." The carriage door opened, a footman waiting to hand them down. The ball beckoned, society awaited. But everything had changed in the space of a few words. Everything. Clara allowed herself to be handed down from the carriage, her mind in turmoil. The Duke's declaration had shaken the foundations of the careful wall she had built around her heart. She had told herself again and again that this was a job, a means to an end, a temporary arrangement that would conclude with her return to ordinary life. She had not allowed herself to acknowledge the feelings that had been growing like ivy, slowly and insidiously, until they covered everything. The Montrose ball was as brilliant as any they had attended, but Clara moved through it as if in a dream. She danced with the Duke, acutely aware of his hand at her waist, his eyes on her face. She made conversation with matrons and debutantes, her responses automatic while her thoughts churned. What was she to do? The Duke's feelings, however genuine they seemed in the moment, was surely born of grief and loneliness. He had loved his wife beyond reason. He had said so himself. How could he now claim to care for the woman he had hired to impersonate her? And yet, when she caught him watching her across the ballroom, there was no mistaking the look in his eyes. It was not the haunted grief she had seen in those early days, but something warmer, more immediate, something that spoke not of the past but of the present, of her. "Your Grace," a voice interrupted her thoughts. Clara turned to find a young gentleman bowing before her. Lord Pemberton, if she remembered correctly, a connection of the Duke's family. "Might I have the honor of this dance?" Clara glanced toward the Duke, who stood in conversation with several other gentlemen across the room. He caught her eye and gave a small nod of permission. She accepted Lord Pemberton's hand and allowed him to lead her onto the floor. "It is good to see you recovered, Your Grace," Lord Pemberton said as they began to waltz. "The Duke has been quite transformed since your return to health. We were all most concerned during your illness." "You are very kind," Clara replied automatically. Lord Pemberton's expression grew thoughtful. "If I may speak frankly, Your Grace, there were those who doubted you would recover at all. Indeed, there were even whispers that you had passed away, and that the Duke was in such deep mourning that he could not bear to announce it publicly." Clara's steps faltered slightly before she recovered. "As you can see, Lord Pemberton, reports of my demise were greatly exaggerated." "Indeed," he agreed, but his eyes remained sharp with speculation. "Though I must confess, you seem different from how I remember you. There is a vitality to you now that was perhaps absent before your illness." Alarm bells rang in Clara's mind. Lord Pemberton had known the real Duchess. Of course he had. They moved in the same circles. She had been so focused on general mannerisms and social graces that she had not prepared for someone who knew the late Duchess personally. "Illness changes a person," Clara said carefully. "One emerges with a new appreciation for life." "How true," Lord Pemberton murmured. "Tell me, Your Grace, do you still maintain your interest in botanical illustration? I recall you were quite accomplished in that art." Clara's mind raced. Botanical illustration. She knew nothing of it. The Duke had not mentioned it in his briefings. "I find my interests have shifted somewhat," she said, striving for a light tone. "One cannot remain unchanged by such an ordeal."
"Of course not," Lord Pemberton agreed, but doubt flickered in his eyes. "Though I must say, I should dearly love to see your work again. Your drawings of the roses in the Westbrook Conservatory were particularly exquisite. Do you still have them? I am afraid my illness took a toll on my artistic endeavors." Clara replied, her heart racing. "I have not taken up my pencils in some time." "A pity," Lord Pemberton said. As the dance concluded, he bowed deeply. "I do hope you will recover that passion, Your Grace. It would be a loss to see such talent abandoned."
As he walked away, Clara felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature of the ballroom. She had been recognized, or rather, she had not been recognized. Lord Pemberton suspected something was amiss. How long before his suspicions led to questions? How long before the entire carefully constructed deception came crashing down? The Duke materialized at her side, concern etched on his features. "Are you well? You look pale." "We need to leave," Clara said quietly. Now, to his credit, the Duke did not argue or question. Within minutes, they had made their excuses and were seated once more in the carriage, the Montrose residence receding behind them. "What happened?" the Duke demanded once they were underway. Clara relayed the conversation with Lord Pemberton, watching as the Duke's expression grew increasingly grave. "He suspects," the Duke said flatly when she finished, "or if he does not suspect outright, he has doubts." "I am sorry," Clara said miserably. "I did not know about the botanical illustrations. You never mentioned." "It is not your fault," the Duke interrupted. I cannot expect you to know every detail of my late wife's life, but if Pemberton is suspicious, others may be as well. The illusion is crumbling. A heavy silence fell between them, broken only by the rattle of carriage wheels over cobblestones. "Then it is over," Clara said at last. "The pretense ends here, tonight. I will pack my belongings and leave in the morning. You can claim that the Duchess's illness has returned, that she requires retirement to the country. It will buy you time to—" "No," the Duke said sharply. "What do you mean, no, Your Grace? We have no choice. If Lord Pemberton speaks of his suspicions, if he investigates, then let him investigate," the Duke replied, his voice firm with sudden decision. "Let him speak. Let the entire ton know the truth, if they wish." Clara stared at him in disbelief. "Have you gone mad? The scandal would destroy you. Everything you have worked to protect. Everything I have worked to protect no longer matters," the Duke said, turning to face her fully. The gaslight from the street illuminated his features, highlighting the determination in his eyes. "Not if it means losing you, Clara. You do not know what you are saying," Clara protested. "The grief, the strain of maintaining the deception." "I know exactly what I am saying," he interrupted, "and I am not speaking from grief or strain. I am speaking from the clearest understanding I have had in 2 years." He reached for her hand, and this time she did not pull away. "When I lost Evelyn, I thought my life had ended. I went through the motions of existence, but there was no joy in it, no purpose beyond preserving her memory. And then you came, and at first, yes, you were simply a means to an end, a way to maintain a fiction long enough to secure what needed securing." He paused, his thumb tracing circles on the back of her hand. "But somewhere in these weeks, Clara, you stopped being a means to an end. You became the end itself. When I wake in the morning, my first thought is of you. When I attend to business, I find myself wondering what you would think of this decision or that. When I see something beautiful, my instinct is to share it with you, not with the memory of my late wife, but with you, Clara Hartley, in all your living, breathing reality." Tears pricked Clara's eyes. "You cannot choose me over your reputation, your standing in society. I am nobody. A seamstress from Cheapside. The ton will never accept." "Then let them reject us," the Duke said fiercely. "I have learned at great cost that life is too short and too precious to waste on the opinions of people who care more for appearances than for truth. I loved my wife, Clara. I will always treasure her memory, but she is gone, and I am still here, and I have been granted something I never expected. A second chance at happiness, if only I am brave enough to seize it." The carriage had arrived at Westbrook Manor, but neither of them moved to descend. "What are you asking of me?" Clara whispered. "I am asking you to stay," the Duke replied. "Not as a hired actress playing a part, but as yourself, as Clara Hartley, who might, if she were willing, consider becoming Clara Ashford, Duchess of Westbrook, in truth rather than in name only." "You are proposing marriage," Clara said faintly, "to your employee, to a woman you hired to impersonate your dead wife. This is madness." "Perhaps it is," the Duke agreed, a faint smile touching his lips. "But I have been trapped in sanity and reason for 2 years, and they brought me nothing but misery. Let me embrace madness, if it means embracing life again, embracing you." Clara's mind whirled with 1,000 objections, 1,000 reasons why this could never work. But beneath the panic and disbelief, hope was blooming, tender and fragile as a seedling pushing through winter soil. "I am afraid," she confessed, "afraid that you will wake one day and realize you have made a terrible mistake, that you will look at me and see only a poor copy of what you lost." "I will never see that," the Duke said with quiet conviction. Because you are not a copy, Clara. You are wholly and entirely yourself, and it is yourself I have come to care for. Not your resemblance to anyone else, but your kindness, your strength, your quick wit, and your generous heart. He raised her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her gloved knuckles. I crossed an ocean of grief to find my way back to life. Now I am asking you to cross the chasm between your world and mine, to take a leap of faith with a man who has only just learned how to hope again. The gaslight flickered, casting dancing shadows across his features. Clara saw in his eyes not the desperate grief that had driven him to hire her, but something new and precious. The possibility of a future. If I say yes, Clara began slowly. If I agree to this madness, it cannot be as an actress playing a role. I must be permitted to be myself, Clara Hartley, even when I become Clara Ashford. I will not spend my life pretending to be someone I am not. I would not ask you to, the Duke assured her. In fact, I insist upon it. Let society accept us as we are, or not at all. Clara drew a shaking breath, standing on the precipice of a decision that would alter the entire course of her life. She thought of the cold boarding house in Cheapside, the endless hours bent over needlework for pennies. She thought of the weeks at Westbrook Manor, where for the first time in her life she had known comfort, security, and something more. The warmth of growing affection, the thrill of connection, the dawning recognition that she had fallen in love with the man who had hired her to wear his dead wife's face. Then yes, she said, the word barely audible. Yes, I will stay. Yes, I will marry you. God help us both for the choice we are making. The Duke's face transformed, joy breaking across his features like sunrise after a long night. He pulled Clara into his arms with uncharacteristic abandon, and she found herself laughing through her tears as he held her. You will not regret this, he promised against her hair. I swear to you, Clara, I will spend every day proving that this choice was the right one. We are going to cause a scandal the likes of which London has never seen, Clara pointed out, though she made no move to leave his embrace. Let them scandal, the Duke replied, pulling back just enough to look at her face. Let them gossip and speculate to their heart's content. I have you, and that is worth more than all the approval of society. When they finally descended from the carriage, the household was in an uproar. News of their early departure from the ball had preceded them, and Mrs. Pemberton awaited them in the entrance hall, wringing her hands. Your Grace, she stammered, looking between them in confusion. Is all well? We heard. All is very well, Mrs. Pemberton, the Duke said, his arm still around Clara's waist. In fact, all is better than it has been in a very long time. Please summon the staff to the drawing room. I have an announcement to make. Within minutes, the drawing room was filled with curious servants. From the butler down to the scullery maids, they exchanged nervous glances, clearly uncertain what to expect. The Duke cleared his throat, his hand finding Clara's and holding it firmly. I have gathered you here tonight to inform you of significant changes ahead. As many of you know, the arrangement that brought Miss Hartley to this household was temporary in nature. That arrangement is now concluded. A murmur rippled through the assembled staff. Mrs. Pemberton's eyes filled with tears. But I have asked Miss Hartley to remain at Westbrook Manor, the Duke continued, not as an employee but as my betrothed. She has done me the great honor of accepting, and in due course she will become my wife and the Duchess of Westbrook, not in name only, but in truth. The silence that followed was profound. Clara felt her cheeks burning under the weight of dozens of stares. Then Mrs. Pemberton stepped forward, a smile breaking through her tears. Oh, Your Grace, she said, addressing Clara. Oh, this is wonderful news indeed. You have brought this house back to life, and His grace with it. We could not be happier." One by one, the other servants added their congratulations, their expressions showing genuine pleasure. Only a few of the older staff members looked troubled, perhaps remembering the first Duchess and questioning the propriety of her replacement. When the servants had been dismissed, Clara found herself alone with the Duke in the library, the room where they had spent so many evenings in careful pretense. Now everything had changed. "They will talk," Clara said, moving to stand before the fire. "The servants always talk, and their gossip will spread beyond these walls." "Let it spread," the Duke replied, coming to stand beside her. "We will face whatever comes together." "You make it sound so simple," Clara said, "but you know it will not be. Your aunt, Lady Beatrice, she has already expressed doubts about me, about whether I am truly your wife. When she learns the truth, that you hired me to play a role and then decided to actually marry me, my aunt's approval is not required for my happiness." The Duke interrupted gently. "Nor is anyone else's. The only approval I need is yours, Clara, and you have already given it." Clara turned to face him fully, searching his features for any sign of doubt or hesitation. She found none, only calm certainty and a warmth that made her heart race. "How did this happen?" she wondered aloud. "How did we arrive here, at this moment, when just 3 months ago I was sewing buttons in a boarding house and you were lost in grief?" "I think," the Duke said, thoughtfully, "that we were both lost in our own ways, you in poverty and hopelessness, I in grief and guilt, and somehow, through this strange and unconventional arrangement, we found each other." He reached up to cup her face with one hand, his touch gentle. "I do not pretend to understand the workings of fate, Clara, but I am profoundly grateful for whatever force brought you to my door." Before Clara could respond, he kissed her, a sweet and tender meeting of lips that sent warmth flooding through her entire body. It was nothing like the careful, restrained interactions they had maintained during their public pretense. This was real, immediate, and full of promise. When they finally drew apart, Clara was breathless, her heart pounding. "We are truly doing this," she said, wonder in her voice. "We are truly throwing caution aside and choosing each other." "We are," the Duke confirmed, a smile playing at his lips, "and I, for one, cannot wait to see what scandal we create." The scandal, when it broke, was indeed spectacular. Within 3 days of the Duke's announcement to his household, rumors were spreading through London like wildfire. The Duke of Westbrook, so recently in mourning, had hired an actress to impersonate his dead wife and was now planning to actually marry her. The tone was divided between those who found the whole affair romantic and those who were scandalized beyond measure. Lady Beatrice, the Duke's formidable aunt, arrived at Westbrook Manor in a fury, her face purple with rage. "Have you taken complete leave of your senses?" she demanded, sweeping past the butler without waiting to be announced. "To marry your employee? To make a public spectacle of yourself and the entire Ashford name?" The Duke received her in his study, with Clara at his side. "Good afternoon, Aunt Beatrice," he said calmly. "I trust your journey was pleasant. Do not take that tone with me, Edmund." Lady Beatrice snapped. "You know perfectly well why I am here. This woman," she gestured dismissively at Clara, "is not fit to be Duchess of Westbrook. She is a nobody, a fortune hunter who has taken advantage of your grief." "Aunt Beatrice," the Duke interrupted, his voice gone cold, "you will speak of my betrothed with respect, or you will leave this house immediately." Lady Beatrice's mouth opened and closed like a fish. "Your betrothed? Have you forgotten that you already had a wife? That sweet, gentle Evelyn, who loved you so." "I have forgotten nothing," the Duke said quietly. "Evelyn will always hold a place in my heart. But she is gone, and I am still here. I have found, against all expectation, a chance at happiness again. Would you truly deny me that? Happiness? Lady Beatrice scoffed. This is not happiness, Edmund. This is madness born of grief. When you come to your senses, you will realize I am perfectly in possession of my senses, the Duke countered. For the first time in 2 years, I see clearly, and what I see is a future with Clara at my side. If you cannot accept that, then I am sorry, but it will not change my decision. Lady Beatrice's gaze turned to Clara, sharp and assessing. And you, girl? What do you have to say for yourself? Do you truly believe society will accept you as Duchess? Clara met the older woman's eyes steadily, drawing on every ounce of courage she possessed. I do not know if society will accept me, Lady Beatrice, but I know that I love your nephew, and that I will do everything in my power to be worthy of the position he has offered me. Whether that is enough remains to be seen. Something in Clara's direct answer seemed to give Lady Beatrice pause. Her expression softened fractionally. At least you have the wit to recognize the challenge before you, she said grudgingly. That is something, I suppose. She turned back to her nephew. You are determined in this course? I am, the Duke replied. Lady Beatrice sighed heavily. Then I suppose I have no choice but to support you, though God knows what your mother would say if she was still with us. A faint smile touched her lips, though knowing Margaret, she would probably approve. She always did say you needed someone with spirit to shake you from your serious moods. The confrontation with Lady Beatrice proved to be only the first of many challenges. Over the following weeks, Clara found herself subjected to intense scrutiny from all quarters of society. Invitations arrived at Westbrook Manor, but she knew they were motivated more by curiosity than by acceptance. The ton wanted to observe the nobody who had captured the Duke's heart, to find fault, to gossip. The Duke stood by her through it all, his support unwavering. When Lady Hertford made a cutting remark about Clara's background at a musicale, the Duke responded with such icy politeness that the woman fled in tears. When Lord Pemberton, still suspicious, tried to question Clara about inconsistencies in her knowledge of the late Duchess's life, the Duke simply announced the truth to the entire gathering. Miss Hartley was indeed hired to impersonate my late wife, he said calmly, his voice carrying across the stunned ballroom. It was a deception born of desperation, and I take full responsibility for it. But in the course of that arrangement, I discovered something far more valuable than any business contract. I discovered a woman of intelligence, compassion, and strength. A woman I have come to love and respect. And yes, a woman I intend to marry, regardless of what any of you may think of the matter. The ballroom erupted in shocked whispers, but the Duke simply took Clara's hand and led her from the room, his head held high. In the carriage afterward, Clara found herself laughing through tears. You realize you have just ensured that we will be the subject of gossip for months to come. Years, more likely, the Duke agreed, grinning. But we will face it together, will we not? Together, Clara echoed, squeezing his hand. The wedding was held 6 weeks later, a quiet affair at Westbrook Manor, with only close family and friends in attendance. Clara wore a gown of ivory silk, simple but elegant, her hair adorned with orange blossoms from the conservatory. As she walked down the aisle on the arm of her uncle, the only family she had left, she saw the Duke waiting at the altar, his eyes shining with emotion. The ceremony was brief but moving. When the vicar pronounced them husband and wife, the Duke kissed Clara with such tenderness that several of the guests dabbed at their eyes. At the wedding breakfast afterward, Lady Beatrice raised her glass in a toast. To the Duke and Duchess of Westbrook, she declared. May their unconventional beginning lead to a conventional happiness, and may those of us who doubted learn to trust in the power of love to surprise us all. The guests echoed the toast, and Clara felt warmth flooding through her. Perhaps they would never be fully accepted by the highest echelons of society. Perhaps there would always be whispers and speculation. But in this moment, surrounded by well-wishers, with her hand clasped in her husband's, Clara found that she did not care. That night, as they stood together on the terrace overlooking the moonlit gardens, the Duke pulled Clara close. "Do you regret it?" he asked softly. "Any of it?" Clara considered the question seriously. She thought of the poverty she had escaped, the role she had been hired to play, the scandal they had created. She thought of the challenges still ahead, the disapproval they would face, the whispers that would follow them, and then she looked at the man beside her, the man who had crossed an ocean of grief to find his way back to life, the man who had seen beyond the pretense to the reality beneath. "No," she said with quiet certainty, "I regret nothing." The Duke smiled, the expression transforming his face. "Nor do I." As they stood together under the stars, Clara reflected on the strange journey that had brought them to this moment. She had been hired to play a dead woman, to wear her clothes, speak her words, inhabit her life. But somewhere in that pretense, she had found her own truth. She had discovered strength she did not know she possessed, courage to face a world that looked down on her, and love in the most unexpected of places. The Duke had forgotten it was just an act, but so had she. And in that mutual forgetting, they had found something far more real than any performance could be. "What are you thinking?" the Duke asked, noting her pensive expression. "I am thinking," Clara replied, "that sometimes the most beautiful truths emerge from the most elaborate lies, and I am grateful, more than I can say, for the lie that brought us together and the truth we found within it." "As am I," the Duke murmured, pressing a kiss to her temple. "As am I." In the weeks and months that followed, the Duke and his new Duchess settled into a life that defied the expectations of society. Clara transformed Westbrook Manor in ways both subtle and profound. Where the late Duchess had preferred formal entertaining, Clara opened the house to more intimate gatherings. Where tradition had dictated strict adherence to social hierarchy, Clara invited scholars, artists, and even a few of her former companions from Cheapside, much to the horror of the more conservative members of the ton. But gradually, grudgingly, society began to accept the match. It helped that the Duke was clearly devoted to his new wife, that Clara carried herself with dignity and grace, and that Lady Beatrice, once convinced of their genuine affection, became a surprisingly staunch defender of her nephew's choice. 1 year after their wedding, Clara discovered she was with child. The news filled the Duke with a mixture of joy and terror, memories of his first wife's death in childbed still haunting him. "I cannot lose you," he confessed one night, holding Clara close. "I cannot survive that again." "You will not lose me," Clara assured him, though she knew no such promise could be made with certainty. "I am stronger than I look, Edmund. I survived poverty, scandal, and the judgment of society. I will survive this too." When the time came, Clara labored for 8 hours before delivering a healthy son. The Duke, who had insisted on remaining nearby despite the impropriety, burst into the birthing room the moment he heard the baby's cry. He found Clara exhausted but radiant, their son cradled in her arms. "Say hello to your father," Clara said softly, extending the bundle toward him. The Duke took his son with trembling hands, tears streaming down his face. "Thank you," he whispered. "Thank you for giving me this, for giving me everything." 2 years later, a daughter followed, and then another son. Westbrook Manor rang with the sounds of children's laughter, a joy it had not known in generations. Clara proved to be a devoted mother and a capable duchess, managing the household and the estate with the same skill she had once shown in transforming Ravenhurst. And the Duke, who had once hired a stranger to wear his dead wife's face, found himself married to a woman who had become his partner in every sense of the word. They disagreed on occasion, of course. Clara's independent spirit sometimes clashed with Edmund's more traditional instincts, but they had learned, through their unconventional beginning, the importance of honesty and communication. They talked through their differences, compromised when necessary, and supported each other through every challenge. On the 5th anniversary of their wedding, Edmund presented Clara with a gift, a portrait he had commissioned from one of London's finest artists. But instead of the formal, stiff poses that usually characterized such works, the artist had captured Clara as she truly was. She sat in the conservatory, surrounded by the botanical illustrations she had taught herself to create, her face alive with concentration and joy. "It is beautiful," Clara breathed, studying the painting. "But why?" "Because I wanted to capture you," Edmund explained. "Not as a replacement for someone else, not as a role you were playing, but as yourself." Clara Ashford, Duchess of Westbrook, the woman who saved me from myself and taught me how to live again. Clara turned to embrace him, her eyes bright with emotion. "You saved me too," she reminded him. "From poverty, from hopelessness, from a life that held no promise. We saved each other, Edmund." "That we did," he agreed, holding her close. As the years passed, the scandal of their beginning faded into memory. The tone found new gossip to occupy their attention, and the Duke and Duchess of Westbrook became simply another aristocratic couple, distinguished only by the obvious affection they showed one another. But those who knew them well, who had witnessed their journey from deception to devotion, understood that theirs was a love story unlike any other. It had begun with a business arrangement and a dead woman's face. It had been forged in scandal and tested by society's disapproval, but it had endured because beneath the pretense and the performance, two lonely souls had recognized each other. Clara sometimes thought about the boarding house in Cheapside, about the desperate seamstress she had once been. That woman seemed like a stranger now, someone from a distant past, and yet, without her poverty, without her willingness to accept an outrageous offer, without her courage to step into a dead woman's shoes, she would never have found this life, this love, this family. One evening, as Clara sat in the conservatory working on her botanical illustrations, her eldest son playing at her feet, she heard footsteps approaching. Edmund appeared in the doorway, their daughter balanced on his hip, their youngest son trailing behind him. "We were wondering," Edmund said with a smile, "if we might persuade you to abandon your drawings long enough to join us for a walk in the gardens." Clara set aside her pencils, her heart full. "Nothing would make me happier," she replied. As they walked together through the gardens she had helped to design, children running ahead while she and Edmund followed hand in hand, Clara reflected on the unexpected path her life had taken. She had been hired to play a part, to step into another woman's life for a few brief months. But in doing so, she had found her own life, her own identity, her own love. The Duke had hired her to play his deceased wife in public, but he had forgotten it was just an act, and in forgetting he had opened his heart to the possibility of loving again, of building a new life rather than clinging to the past. It was not the story either of them would have written for themselves, but it was their story, strange and scandalous and beautiful in its own way, and neither of them would have changed a single moment of it. True love does not replace what was lost, but creates something entirely new. The greatest role any of us play is not the one assigned by others, but the one we choose for ourselves. And sometimes the most elaborate deceptions lead us to the most profound truths. If this story touched your heart, please like and comment below. What moment moved you most? Would you have accepted the Duke's offer? Join our community of romance enthusiasts as we continue to explore timeless tales of love, courage, and second chances. Subscribe to our channel for more emotional Victorian romance stories that remind us all that love can bloom in the most unexpected places.